I walked into my own living room and froze. The photo of me and my late husband, the one that had hung there for 30 years, was gone. My son's wife smiled and said it didn't match the new decor. I swallowed my pride. But the very next morning, I heard her screaming, "Why isn't my name on the property papers?" That's when I realized she wasn't just redecorating. She was erasing me. What would you have done? You know, I've lived in this house for more than 35 years. Every creak in the floorboards carries my footsteps. Every corner has a piece of me in it. But if you asked me what I loved most about this place, I'd tell you without hesitation, it was that wall in the living room. We called it the family wall. I started it back when my boy, Marcus, was no bigger than a shoebox. It began with just one photo, him on my lap wearing a little yellow onesie, eyes wide open like he was staring straight at the future. Over the years, I added more. Birthdays, graduations, my mama's last Christmas, even my late husband's army portrait. That wall was history. It was sacrifice. It was blood and tears glued into frames. It was proof that I had built something worth remembering. So when I walked into the living room that Tuesday afternoon, carrying a basket of folded laundry, and saw that my picture, was gone, I felt a chill. The space where it had hung for decades was just blank. A pale square on the wall, surrounded by all the others, like a missing tooth in a smile. I put the basket down and asked, "Where's my photo?" My daughter-in-law, Tasha, was standing on a stool, rearranging frames with one hand while holding her phone in the other. She looked down at me with this careless smile and said, "Oh, that old picture? It didn't match the new decor." Just like that. No, I was thinking we should freshen things up, Mama. No respect, no softness, just tossed out like I was some outdated wallpaper. I stood there, frozen, my throat tight. It wasn't just a photo. It was me on my wedding day, smiling so wide you'd think the sun rose just for me. My husband had his arm around me, and Marcus, just 7 years old then, was holding my hand. That picture wasn't just me, it was my story, our story. And she had erased it without even blinking. I wanted to say something sharp, something to make her understand what she had done. But instead, I swallowed it down. I've learned over 68 years that sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. Still, the silence burned me alive inside. Tasha climbed down from the stool, still looking at her phone. She didn't even notice the way I was staring at that empty space on the wall. "We're going for a modern look," she said, waving her hand like she was some interior designer on television. "Minimalist, clean lines, no clutter." No clutter. That's what I was now. Clutter. I wanted to scream, "That's my life you just called. Clutter." But my son walked in right then, whistling like nothing in the world was wrong. Marcus looked at the wall, then at me, and I waited for him to say something, anything, to defend me. But all he did was kiss his wife on the cheek and ask if she needed help moving the frames. Do you know how that feels? To raise a boy, break your back working 2 jobs so he can go to college, to pray over him every night so he'd be safe in this cruel world, and then stand there and realize he doesn't see you anymore? That's what it felt like I was invisible in my own house. I didn't say a word. I picked up that laundry basket and carried it to my room, but inside me, something cracked. Not like a window pane, not something that could be mended with glue. It was deeper than that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the sacrifices I made for Marcus. I remembered walking miles in the snow because the bus broke down just to make it to work on time. I remembered skipping meals so he could eat. I remembered pawning my wedding ring once just to keep the lights on. And now, my picture didn't match the decor. The next morning, I decided to put the photo back myself. I went searching in the storage bin where Tasha keeps her so-called extra decorations. I dug through vases, fake plants, and cheap throw pillows until I found it, my frame. The glass was cracked across the corner, like somebody had tossed it carelessly. My hands trembled when I picked it up. I wiped it clean, cradling it like it was a newborn baby. I was about to march into that living room and hang it back on the wall myself. But before I could, I heard Tasha's voice, shrill, panicked, echoing through the hall. "Marcus, why is my name not on the property papers?" Her words slammed into me like a freight train. Property papers. My house. The house I worked for, paid for, protected with my very soul. I froze in the hallway, holding that cracked frame against my chest, listening to her scream at my son about why she wasn't listed as an owner. And right then, I realized that missing photo wasn't just about decor. It wasn't even about disrespect. No, baby. It was about something much bigger. She wasn't just trying to erase me from the wall. She was trying to erase me from my own life, and I promised myself in that moment I wasn't going to let her. When I tell you that Tasha never liked me, believe me, I'm not exaggerating. From the very first day Marcus brought her home, there was something in her eyes that told me she had already decided I was a problem she needed to deal with. I remember it clear as day, the way she looked around my house like she was sizing it up. Her nails tapped on the counter, her eyes lingered on the pictures, the furniture, the curtains. She wasn't visiting a home, she was surveying territory. That was before the ring, before the wedding. And my boy? He was grinning ear to ear, so blinded by love that he couldn't see the storm that was brewing. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Lord knows I tried. I told myself maybe it was nerves, maybe she just wasn't raised the same way, maybe it was a misunderstanding. But as time went on, I learned something about Tasha. She didn't misunderstand. She dismissed. There's a difference, see? I was raised on respect. My mama used to say, "Respect is like air. You don't notice it until it's gone." I gave it freely and I expected it back. But from the start, Tasha acted like I was an old relic sitting in her way. When Marcus proposed, I put on a smile, clapped my hands, and even gave her a hug, though my spirit felt uneasy. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll take good care of him now. You can rest." I can rest? I had spent 30 years giving everything I had to my son, making sure he had a roof, food, and the chance to be somebody in this world. And this woman, not even married to him yet, was already telling me to step aside like my job was finished, like I was retired from being a mother. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded, but it was the first seed of resentment she planted in me. And it wasn't long before more seeds followed. She'd come over for dinner and criticize my cooking, saying things like, "Marcus likes his food with more seasoning. I'll fix it for him." Now, I've been cooking since I was a girl in my mama's kitchen, feeding 6 siblings on scraps and turning them into meals that made folks lick their plates clean. But I'd watch her sprinkle her store-bought spice blends over my collard greens like I was some amateur. And my son? He'd smile, nod, and let her do it. That's when I first felt that pinch in my chest, that slow realization that Marcus wasn't just in love, he was under her spell. She controlled everything, how he dressed, where they went, how much time he spent with me. If I called, she'd answer his phone half the time. If I wanted to see him, she'd say, "We're busy." Busy became the anthem of their marriage. But the moment that cut me deepest came at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I had set the table like I always did, polished silver, candles lit, turkey resting golden brown in the middle. Family started pouring in, nieces, cousins, neighbors. It was a full house. I loved Thanksgiving because it was the one day where everybody remembered we were connected. When Marcus and Tasha walked in, I hugged them both. I said, "Welcome home." And do you know what she said? In front of everyone? "Marcus, tell her this isn't home anymore. Our house is home now." The room went quiet. Forks froze mid-air. My son looked down at the floor, and I waited for him to correct her, to tell her this was still his mother's house, the house he grew up in, the house where every scar on the floor had a memory. But he didn't. He just kissed her, cheek, and said nothing. That was the day I realized my place in his life was shrinking, like a shadow at sunset. It's not that I wanted to control him. God knows I raised him to stand tall, to be his own man, but I never thought he'd allow someone else to push me out completely. I never thought he'd trade his mother's love for his wife's approval, and yet, little by little, that's what was happening. The photo missing from the wall wasn't the first insult. It was just the loudest. I'd seen this pattern building, the jokes at my expense, the small humiliations, the way she'd correct me in front of others, like the time I called Marcus by his childhood nickname, Junior, and she rolled her eyes and said, "He's a grown man now. Stop babying him." Or the time she told me to stop wearing my Sunday hats to church because they were too much, even though those hats had been part of my identity since I was a girl. I stayed quiet through most of it because I didn't want to cause division. I thought keeping peace was better than starting war. But peace isn't peace if it's built on swallowing your dignity. That night, after I heard her screaming about the property papers, I lay awake again, staring into the dark, replaying every moment that led us here. The whispers, the side comments, the constant need to erase me, to replace me. It wasn't random. It wasn't harmless. It was deliberate. And I had a sinking feeling that the missing picture on the wall was just the first piece of me she planned to remove. What else was she planning to strip away? My role as mother? My voice in this house? My very name on the deed? I clenched my fists against the blanket and whispered into the night, "Not while I'm breathing." Because if she thought 68 years of struggle, sacrifice, and survival could be erased with a fresh coat of paint and some new decor, she was about to learn. This old woman still had fight left in her. Marcus turned 40 last year, and I wanted to make it special. You don't get to see your child reach 40 every day, and for a black mother who raised him mostly on her own, it felt like a victory. I'd prayed over him through every trial, through gang-ridden streets, through temptations, through nights I didn't know if the lights would stay on. And here he was, alive, successful, standing tall at 40. I thought we would celebrate not just him, but us. So I went all out. I cooked for 3 days straight. Smothered chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese baked the way he loved, cornbread fresh out the oven. I dug out old photo albums to lay on the coffee table so guests could flip through the memories. I even wore the pearl necklace his father gave me on our 10th anniversary, just to honor where it all began. When Marcus and Tasha walked in, I opened the door wide with pride. Family filled the house, cousins, neighbors, old church friends. Everyone was smiling, hugging, laughing. My heart swelled. For a moment, it felt like the family wall was alive, every frame breathing through the people in that room. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Tasha strutted in, wearing a sparkling red dress, the kind that screamed for attention. She looked around like the hostess, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, complimenting folks on their outfits like this was her party. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to sour the mood. We all sat down to eat, plates piled high, laughter bubbling across the table. I asked everyone to bow their heads so I could pray over the meal, and when I finished, I lifted my head to see Tasha smirking. "You know," she said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "we should really start saying shorter prayers. Marcus gets restless when the food's sitting there getting cold." The table went quiet for a second. I felt heat rush up my neck, but I forced a smile. "Well," I said softly, "a prayer never spoiled a meal in this house." Everyone chuckled lightly, but the sting stayed with me. Later, when the cake came out, I stood beside Marcus, knife in hand, ready to cut the first slice. I leaned over and whispered, "Baby, I'm proud of you. You've come so far." Before he could answer, Tasha clinked her glass with a spoon. "Excuse me, everyone, I just want to say a few words." She stood up, flashing that bright smile of hers, and said, "Marcus is who he is today because we built a life together. I gave him the motivation, the discipline, the vision. Without me, he wouldn't be this man you're celebrating." I swear the room froze. My fork slipped against the plate and scraped loud enough to echo. My chest tightened. I looked at my son, waiting for him to correct her, to remind her of all the years before she ever walked into his life. But he didn't. He just smiled, leaned over, and kissed her hand. I felt something shatter inside me. The people at the table looked from me to them, their eyes darting, uneasy. I forced another smile because I wasn't about to let them see me break. But inside, my heart was splitting open. After dinner, while everyone was laughing and playing dominoes, I slipped into the kitchen to catch my breath. I pressed my palms against the counter and whispered to myself, "This is my son, my flesh and blood. How can he let her erase me like that?" Then I heard voices drifting from the hallway. "Baby, why didn't you put me on the property papers yet?" Tasha hissed. Marcus sighed. "It's complicated, Mama." "Mama this, Mama that," she snapped. "You're a grown man. That house is ours now. You need to act like it." My heart dropped into my stomach. So it was true. All those whispers, all those side glances, all that attitude, it wasn't just about control. She wanted my home. The roof I built with sweat, the walls I painted with hope, the very ground I bled for. I stepped back into the shadows, clutching the doorway, listening. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just said, "We'll figure it out." I wanted to scream. I wanted to march in there and remind him who paid that first mortgage, who held his hand when his daddy passed, who sat up nights sewing patches on his clothes so he wouldn't go to school looking poor. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. Because in that silence, I felt something new rising inside me. Not grief, not disappointment. Resolve. If they thought they could push me out of my own house, they had another thing coming. The laughter from the living room spilled into the hall, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the cracked lines in my hands. "These hands built this life," I whispered, "and I'll be damned if I let anyone take it from me." When I returned to the table, I wore a smile so polished you'd never guess what I had overheard. But deep inside, I was making a promise. That night, lying in bed, I prayed, not for strength, but for strategy. I told the Lord, "Show me how to protect what's mine. Show me how to fight without losing myself." Because one thing was clear as the moonlight streaming through my window. They had started a war they didn't even know they'd lose. And I was done being silent. The morning after that birthday dinner, the whole house felt heavy. I woke up before the sun, the way I always do, and sat at the edge of my bed with my Bible open on my lap. I tried to pray, but the words stuck in my throat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus smiling while Tasha claimed my years of sacrifice as her own. I finally got up, put on my robe, and shuffled toward the kitchen to make some coffee. That's when I heard it. A scream so sharp it cut through the walls like glass breaking. "Marcus, why is my name not on the property papers?" The cup slipped right out of my hand and shattered on the floor. My heart thudded in my chest as I froze in the hallway. I didn't want to listen, but my feet carried me closer to their bedroom door. Tasha's voice was a firestorm echoing through the house. "You told me this house was ours. Do you know how embarrassing it is to be married to you and not even have my name on the deed? What am I supposed to tell people? That I'm just a guest here? That your mama owns everything?" Her words cut deeper than any knife. A guest? This was the home I'd bled for, the one my husband and I scraped pennies to buy, the one I protected through storms and layoffs and medical bills. And now, this girl, who hadn't been around for even a fraction of it, was demanding her name be carved into it as though she earned it. Marcus's voice was low, tired. "Tasha, we've talked about this. The papers are in Mama's name. She's the owner." "Then change it," she snapped. "You're her only child. You have the right. Put me on it or don't expect me to keep living. Like this." Silence. Long, heavy silence. I leaned against the wall, clutching my robe tight around me. My ears strained for Marcus's answer, praying, begging in my soul that he'd stand firm, that he'd remind her this house wasn't hers to take. But when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, uncertain. "I'll talk to her. Maybe she'll understand." Understand? Understand what? That my name on those papers was the only thing standing between me and the street? That every brick in this house carried my sweat, my tears, my prayers? My legs trembled. I had to hold onto the wall to keep from falling. Inside their room, I heard Tasha's voice drop lower. Poisonous. Good. Because if you don't fix this, Marcus, you're choosing her over me. And you know how that's gonna end. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding like a drum. I wanted to burst in, to look her dead in the eye and tell her this house wasn't hers. It never would be, and no amount of scheming could change that. But instead, I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the broom, and started sweeping up the broken cup. With every shard I swept, my anger grew sharper. That scream wasn't just a tantrum, it was a declaration. She wasn't content with disrespecting me in front of family or taking my picture off the wall. She wanted the very ground beneath my feet, and the part that cut me deepest was Marcus's silence. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the rising steam from my fresh cup of coffee and thought back to when he was a boy. I remembered the nights he'd crawl into my bed after a nightmare whispering, "Mama, don't let anything happen to me," and I'd hold him close and promise, "As long as I'm breathing, nothing will." Now here he was, a grown man, letting a woman scream about my house as though I was already gone. I sipped my coffee, bitter as it was, and stared out the window at the garden my late husband had planted. The morning sun lit up the roses he used to tend, their petals bright against the dew. He'd built those flower beds with his bare hands, same as he'd helped me build this home. I felt him there with me in that moment, his spirit whispering, "Don't let them take what we built." And I made a promise, to him, to myself, that I wouldn't. That day, I carried myself differently. I didn't stomp, didn't shout, didn't argue. I moved through my house like a shadow, watching, listening. I saw Tasha making calls on the porch, lowering her voice when I walked by. I saw Marcus avoiding my eyes, his shoulders heavy with shame. By nightfall, I knew the battle had begun. I sat at my vanity, brushing my silver hair back, and looked at my reflection. Lines creased my face, yes, but they were the lines of survival, of strength, of a woman who had raised a child on her own and never let the world break her. They thought age made me weak, but age had sharpened me. That scream in the morning wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And while they plotted to erase me, I was already planning how to fight back, because one thing was certain. They might break my picture frames, they might try to rewrite the papers, but they would never erase me. Not from this house, not from Marcus's life, not from history. And the day would come when both of them, my son blinded by love and that woman blinded by greed, would realize just how much fire was left in me. It started with little things, things you wouldn't even notice if you weren't paying attention. A hushed phone call that ended abruptly the moment I walked into the room. A folder quickly slid into a drawer. Marcus standing in the hallway speaking low, then hanging up when I asked who it was. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were planning some surprise. Maybe it was work. But deep down, I knew better. I've lived long enough to know the difference between a secret meant to bless you and a secret meant to bury you. One evening, I was folding laundry in the den when I heard voices in the next room. The walls in this house are thin, thinner than they look, and sound has a way of sliding through the cracks. "Baby, did you call that lawyer?" Tasha's voice sharp as ever. "Yes, but he said we need Mama's consent," Marcus answered, low and tired. "That old woman is going to ruin everything if you don't put your foot down," she hissed. "You're her only son, her only child. You should already own half of this house. She's just being stubborn." My chest tightened. A lawyer. They weren't whispering about birthday dinners or decorations anymore. They were plotting. I held the towel in my hand so tight I thought the seams would tear. A lawyer? For what? The papers were clear. The deed had my name on it, signed and sealed years ago when my husband passed. And here she was trying to claw her way into something she hadn't shed a drop of sweat to build. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. "Marcus," she continued, her tone dripping with honey and venom all at once. "Do you want our children to grow up in a house where your mama controls everything? Do you want me to keep living like I'm a visitor? If she doesn't put me on those papers, she'll try to control us forever." And then she lowered her voice, but I heard it as clear as thunder. "Maybe we should see if she's even fit to make decisions anymore." I dropped that towel. My knees nearly buckled. Fit? Was she talking about my mind? My competence? I backed away from the wall and pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady my breath. I'm 68, yes. I forget where I put my glasses sometimes. Yes. But unfit? To take away my right to my own home? The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, I sat alone in my room, staring at the photo of my husband on the dresser. His eyes were steady, strong, just as they were the day he promised me this house would always be mine. I whispered to him through tears, "They're trying to erase me, love, but I won't let them." The next morning, I decided to test the waters. At breakfast, I sat across from Marcus and asked casually, "Baby, what's been keeping you so busy lately? You've been making a lot of calls." He shifted in his chair, eyes flicking to Tasha. She answered for him. "Just work stuff, Mama. You wouldn't understand." The way she said it, like I was some ignorant fool who couldn't follow a conversation. I forced a smile, but I felt the fire rise in my chest. I didn't push it, not yet. But I started watching closer. When they left the house, I peeked into the study. Papers had been moved, folders stacked differently than I'd left them. One afternoon, I found a sticky note half crumpled in the trash. A lawyer's name, a phone number. That's when I knew this wasn't my imagination. They were building a case against me, brick by brick. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and paper, writing down everything I'd noticed, every phone call, every whispered argument, every word about papers and control. My hands shook as I wrote, but my mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. They wanted to test my competence? Let them try. The next Sunday after church, I stopped by the office of a lawyer I'd known for decades, a family friend who had handled my husband's will. He welcomed me in, his voice warm, but his eyes turned grave when I told him what I'd overheard. "Mrs. Johnson," he said gently, "if your daughter-in-law is talking about incompetence, you need to protect yourself now. Get documentation, medical proof, update your will, your deed, everything. Because if you don't, they could take you to court and try to strip you of your rights." I swallowed hard. So she really could do it? He nodded. "People have lost everything to greedy family, but you're wise to come early. We'll make sure they can't touch what's yours." I left his office with my head high, papers tucked under my arm. For the first time in weeks, I felt power return to me. Not because the fight was over, but because I finally knew I wasn't helpless. When I came home, Tasha greeted me at the door, her smile too wide, too sweet. "Where'd you run off to, Mama?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Just making sure my business stays in order." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. She masked it quickly, but I caught it, and it gave me the smallest taste of satisfaction. That night, as I laid my head down, I whispered to myself, "Let them whisper. Let them plot. This battle has just begun." Because while they thought I was old and easy to break, they didn't realize I had been sharpening myself quietly, preparing for the day I'd fight with everything I had, and that day was coming. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was slow, like rot creeping under a floorboard. At first, it was small changes: a new vase on the dining table, curtains I hadn't chosen, furniture in the wrong place. I'd walk into the living room and notice one of my mother's old quilts folded up and shoved into a closet, or the lace doilies my grandmother made stuffed in a drawer. Every time I asked, Tasha would wave her hand and say, "We're just updating the style, Mama. You know, making it more modern." Modern. That word started to feel like a knife. Modern meant erasing the pieces of me that built this home. Modern meant covering the fingerprints of my history, layer by layer, until nothing of me remained. But then came the day I walked in from the grocery store and found the house crawling with strangers. The music hit me first, some bass-heavy thumping shaking the walls, nothing like the gospel or soul I usually played while cooking. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. My sofa, the one I had saved up months of wages for, was shoved against the wall. My coffee table was gone, and in its place, a group of Tasha's friends sprawled out, drinking, laughing, and snapping photos like they owned the place. One of them, a tall woman with red braids, looked at me and said, "Oh, you must be Tasha's mother-in-law. Hey, girl," as if she was greeting a stranger in passing. I stood there holding my grocery bags, my chest rising and falling. I wanted to scream, "This is my house!" But I bit my tongue until it nearly bled. Tasha bounced out from the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. "Oh, Mama, you're home early. We're just having a little get-together." A little get-together, in my living room, with my furniture shoved aside like junk at a garage sale. I clenched the bags tighter, my hands aching. "This isn't your house to entertain in, Tasha," I said, my voice low. She smiled, that sugary smile that never reached her eyes. "But it's Marcus's house, and what's his is mine." The room erupted with laughter, her friends hooting and clapping as if she'd cracked the funniest joke in the world. My face burned hot with shame. My son wasn't even there to see it, to stop it. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My heart thudded in my ears. I set the groceries down and buried my face in my hands. For a moment, I thought I might break. But then my eyes landed on the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one filled with keepsakes from my mother and grandmother. I stood and opened it, pulling out the quilt my mama made by hand when she was just a girl. Patches of old dresses, aprons, and handkerchiefs sewn together with patience and love. Every stitch told a story. That quilt had kept me warm through nights when I couldn't afford heat, had covered Marcus when he was sick with fever as a child. When I brought it out to lay it over the sofa later that night, I found it tossed in a black trash bag crumpled with old magazines and wrappers. Something inside me snapped. I stormed into the hallway, the quilt clutched to my chest. "Who put this here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The guests fell silent, their laughter dying in their throats. Tasha stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Mama, it's just an old blanket. We don't need it cluttering up the space. I was going to donate it." "Donate it?" My voice cracked. "This quilt is older than you. It carries generations of my family in every stitch. And you call it clutter?" For once, her smile slipped. For a flicker of a second, she looked like a child caught doing something wrong. But then she straightened her shoulders and said, "Times change. We can't live in the past." I looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't just changing curtains or rearranging furniture. She was stripping away my legacy, piece by piece. And she wanted to make sure, when people walked into that house, they wouldn't see me anywhere. Not in the photos, not in the decorations, not in the stories the walls told. Her friends shuffled uncomfortably, murmuring to each other, and one by one they started to gather their things. The party fizzled out, leaving empty glasses and crumbs on my carpet. When the last one left, I stood in the living room, clutching that quilt to my chest like armor. Tasha sauntered past me, rolling her eyes. "You're too sentimental, Mama. You can't hold on to everything forever." I turned to her, my voice quiet but sharp as steel. "This house is built on everything you call clutter, and as long as I'm alive, you don't get to decide what stays and what goes." For the first time, She didn't have a snappy reply. She just stared at me, her jaw tight, before storming upstairs. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence I could live with. That night, I folded the quilt carefully, laid it over my bed, and whispered a promise into the darkness. You can bring strangers into my home. You can move my furniture, but you will not erase me. Not while I still draw breath. And as I drifted into sleep, I knew the time for patience was drawing to an end. The battle lines were being drawn whether Marcus saw it or not, and I was ready. The morning after that party, I woke up with a fire in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Tasha humming in the kitchen like nothing had happened, like she hadn't turned my house into a circus and tossed my mother's quilt in the trash. I knew then. I couldn't sit back and hope Marcus would find his backbone. If I didn't move now, everything I'd worked for could vanish right under my feet. I dressed in my Sunday best, the same way I used to when I had to face a boss who thought I was nothing. A pressed navy skirt, a blouse buttoned to the collar, my pearls around my neck. When I looked in the mirror, I saw lines of age, yes, but also steel. My mama always said, "Dress like you belong in every room you step into." And today, I was stepping into war. I caught the bus into town, the same bus I used to take to work 30 years ago, when I was trying to keep food on the table for Marcus. The ride was long, but it gave me time to think. I thought about my husband, gone too soon, and the promises we made each other, that this house would always be a safe haven, that Marcus would always have a place to return to. I thought about my own mama, who had nothing but made me believe I could build something. And I thought about Tasha, with her sharp tongue and greedy eyes, circling my home like a hawk. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I walked in with my head high. Mr. Carter had been our family lawyer for decades. He was older now, his hair silver, but his eyes still sharp behind those glasses. "Well, Mrs. Johnson," he said warmly, standing to greet me. "It's been a while. What brings you in today?" I sat down across from him and folded my hands. "Mr. Carter, I need to make sure my house, my estate, my name, everything I've built is locked down tight, tighter than a vault. My son's wife, she's been whispering about ownership, about papers, about me being too old to handle my own affairs. I won't let her strip me of what's mine." His face grew serious. He nodded slowly. "You're right to come now, before anything escalates. Too many families tear themselves apart over inheritance, property, greed. Let's make sure yours can't touch what you've built." For the next 2 hours, we worked. He reviewed the deed, updated my will, and had me sign documents making it crystal clear that this house, this land, and every asset I held were mine until my last breath, and that no one, not even my own son, could override it without my explicit consent. Then he leaned forward and said, "One more thing. You should get medical documentation of your mental competence. It may sound insulting, but if they try to claim you're unfit, you'll have proof in hand that you're sharp as ever." I felt my jaw tighten. "They'll try to call me senile, won't they?" He didn't answer, but his silence told me enough. So I made an appointment that very week. I sat in that doctor's office answering every question, reciting words backwards, solving math problems on the spot. When it was done, the doctor smiled at me and said, "Mrs. Johnson, your mind is sharper than most folks half your age." I walked out of there holding that paper like a weapon, proof, evidence, shield and sword. When I got home, Tasha was in the living room flipping through a design magazine. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Out all day again, Mama? You've been busy lately." I set my purse on the table and looked her square in the eye. "Just making sure everything is in order. You never know when people might try to take what isn't theirs." Her smile faltered, just for a second. A flicker of panic flashed across her face before she forced her lips back into that sweet little curve. "Of course, Mama. You do whatever makes you feel secure." I didn't answer. I just walked past her, my heels clicking against the hardwood like the sound of a gavel. That night, As I tucked away the documents in a safe place, I thought about how far I'd come. All those years of scraping by, of doing without, of bending so Marcus could have. And now, here I was, protecting the fruits of all that labor from the very people who should have cherished it. I wasn't naive. I knew a storm was still coming. Tasha wasn't going to stop because I secured some papers. She was like a weed. Cut her down in one place, she'll sprout up in another. But this time, I wasn't waiting for her to make the next move. I whispered into the quiet of my bedroom. You want a war, Tasha? Then you've got one. And you'll learn quick. This old woman doesn't lose. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Because I knew, no matter what came next, I wasn't fighting empty-handed anymore. The papers were signed, the doctor's letter tucked neatly into my dresser drawer, and for the first time in a long while, I felt steady on my feet. But I knew this battle wasn't won yet. Tasha was clever, slippery as an eel, and she wasn't about to stop her scheming just because she hit a wall. No, she was the type to double down, to dig deeper when she smelled resistance. That's why I had to get ahead of her. I started playing a role. To her, I became the tired, forgetful old woman she wanted me to be. I forgot where I put the keys and asked her to help me find them, even though they were right on the counter. I messed up the TV remote and called Marcus in to fix it, letting him believe I was getting clumsy with technology. I let them think I was slipping bit by bit. And while they were watching me stumble, I was watching them. At dinner, I noticed how Tasha whispered things into Marcus's ear, her eyes flicking to me like I was a problem to be solved. I saw how she encouraged him to take on more responsibility, telling him, "It's time you really became the man of this house." One evening, when Marcus was in the shower, I passed by their room and heard her on the phone. "No, not yet," she said in a low voice. "He's still hesitant, but I'll get him there. Just be ready with the paperwork." My blood boiled, but I kept walking, quiet as a shadow. That night, I pulled out a small notebook from my nightstand, the same one I used to keep grocery lists when Marcus was a boy, and I began writing everything down. Dates, times, exact words I overheard. Every phone call cut short when I walked in. Every time Tasha steered conversations toward property, money, or my so-called forgetfulness. I even started carrying a little tape recorder in my pocket, hidden beneath the folds of my dress. Old habits from an old woman. She probably thought, but every word she let slip became evidence in my arsenal. When Sunday came, I invited my sister's daughter, Laverne, over for dinner. Laverne was a sharp one, worked as a paralegal downtown, and I trusted her more than most. I served her a plate of roast chicken and whispered while Tasha was out of the room, "Keep your ears open tonight. Watch how she moves." And Laverne did. All through dinner, she watched the way Tasha interrupted me, corrected me, acted like she was the lady of the house. She noticed the way Marcus followed her lead like a dog on a leash. After dessert, when they went upstairs, Laverne leaned over and said, "Auntie, you're not imagining this. She's planting seeds in his head. But don't worry. We'll make sure she can't touch you." Her words steadied me, like hands holding me up when I thought I might fall. So I kept at it. I let Tasha think she was winning. When she suggested I let her handle paying the bills, I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, that would be such a help, dear." Little did she know I had already switched everything to auto-pay under my name, with receipts tucked neatly into a folder for proof. When she encouraged Marcus to suggest joint ownership, I feigned confusion. "Well, son, if you think that's what's best—" My voice soft, shaky, like I was agreeing, like I was pliable. But behind closed doors, my lawyer had already set it in stone that no joint ownership could be filed without my signed approval. I was letting her dig her own grave, brick by brick, with every scheme she pushed forward. The moment that confirmed my strategy came one late afternoon. I was sitting in the den, crocheting quietly, when Tasha came in and sat across from me. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were sharp. "Mama," she said, her voice dripping honey, "I've been thinking. You've worked hard your whole life. Don't you think it's time to let go of some of these burdens? Why not put the house in both our names? That way, Marcus and I can help manage things. You can relax." I looked up from my yarn and gave her my sweetest smile. "Oh, baby, that's such a thoughtful idea. Why don't you draw up what you think is fair, and we'll look it over together?" Her eyes lit up, greedy and triumphant. "Really?" "Of course," I said. "You two are the future, aren't you?" She reached over and patted my hand. "Don't worry, Mama, we'll take good care of you." But as she walked away, I glanced at the little recorder hidden beneath my shawl. Every word she had just said was captured, preserved like a fly in amber. That night I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to laugh. Quiet, bitter laughter, the kind that comes when you know your enemy thinks they're winning, but you already see the endgame. Tasha thought she was clever. She thought she was weaving a net to trap me. But what she didn't realize was that the net had already flipped and she was walking straight into it. Because when the time came, and I knew it would, I would have more than anger. I would have proof. And then all her whispers behind closed doors would be loud enough for the whole world to hear. It was a Sunday afternoon when the storm finally broke. The house smelled of baked chicken and cornbread, my way of softening the edges of a hard week. I had invited Marcus, Tasha, and a few close relatives over for dinner. Part of me hoped that breaking bread together might remind everyone of where we came from, of the roots we shared. But in my gut, I knew Tasha wouldn't let the night pass without trying to push her agenda. We all sat around the table, plates full, voices mingling in conversation. I watched my nieces laugh, my cousin Henry tell a story about the old neighborhood. For a brief moment, the sound of family filled the house like it used to. I almost believed things could be normal again. Then, like clockwork, Tasha cleared her throat. "Mama," she began, her voice sugar-sweet but her eyes sharp. "We've been meaning to talk to you about the house." The room grew still. Forks froze mid-air. I set my napkin down slowly, knowing what was coming. She continued, her tone growing bolder with each word. "It's time to put Marcus's name, and mine, on the deed. We're married now. We need security, and it's only right that the house reflects our future together." Gasps rippled around the table. My cousin Henry muttered under his breath, "Lord, have mercy." I looked at Marcus, praying he'd speak up, but he kept his head down, pushing peas around his plate like a child caught doing wrong. "Tasha," I said evenly, "this house already has a name on it. Mine. It's been my blood, sweat, and tears that paid for it. Why would I hand it over like a gift?" Her smile slipped, replaced by a hard edge. "Because you're not going to live forever. And when you're gone, what happens then? Do you want to leave us scrambling? Do you want to tear this family apart?" I leaned back, my eyes narrowing. "Funny, I don't recall asking you to worry about what happens when I'm gone. And family doesn't scramble when there's love. They scramble when there's greed." A murmur of agreement rose from the table. Laverne, my niece, sat up straighter, watching closely. But Tasha wasn't finished. She slammed her fork down, her voice rising. "You're selfish, Mama. You think this house belongs only to you, but Marcus is your son. He deserves to have it now. He's the man of this family, not you." The words hit me like a slap. My hands trembled under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Marcus," I said softly, "is that how you feel?" He hesitated, his eyes darting between us. "Mama, maybe it wouldn't hurt to—" My heart broke right there. Hearing my own son, the boy I raised alone, the boy I sacrificed everything for, suggest that I hand over my home to his wife's greed. It was a wound deeper than any cut. The room erupted with voices. Cousin Henry slammed his hand on the table. "Marcus, you ought to be ashamed. That's your mama you're talking to." My sister's friend shook her head, muttering, "Children these days got no respect." But all I could hear was Marcus's voice, low and unsure, echoing in my head. Maybe it wouldn't hurt. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The room went silent again. "Let me make something clear," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for every soul to hear. "This house was bought with my husband's sweat, with my labor, with sacrifices none of you will ever truly understand. It is not up for debate. It is not up for grabs. And it will never, ever belong to anyone who tries to snatch it through lies and manipulation." Tasha scoffed, crossing her arms. "So that's it? You just plan to keep everything in your name? Like Marcus doesn't matter? Like I don't exist?" I turned to her, my gaze steady. "You made yourself loud and clear from the day you stepped into this house. You wanted me erased. You took my picture off the wall, you called my treasures clutter, and you've whispered to lawyers about whether I'm fit to make decisions. Don't stand there and pretend this is about love or security. This is about greed." Gasps filled the room again. Tasha's face flushed, her jaw tightening as she realized I knew more than she thought. Marcus finally lifted his head, his face pale. "Mama, you're misunderstanding." "No," I snapped, the sharpness in my voice silencing even him. "The only misunderstanding here is yours. You let your wife turn you against your own mother. You stood by while she humiliated me, while she tried to erase me, and now you want me to reward you for that betrayal with the very roof over my head." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I refused to show weakness. The table was silent, the air so thick you could cut it. My chest rose and fell, heavy with anger and grief. I looked at Marcus one last time, searching his eyes for the boy I once knew, the boy who used to hold my hand and promise never to leave me. But all I saw was a man too weak to stand against the woman sitting beside him. And in that moment, I knew the fight wasn't just against Tasha. It was against my own son's blindness. I gathered my plate, walked to the kitchen, and left them sitting there in the heavy silence of their own shame. But in my heart, the decision was made. This wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about teaching them a lesson they would never forget. And the next time they tried to corner me, I would be ready with more than words. The night after that dinner, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every word from that table replaying in my mind. The betrayal in Marcus's voice, the venom in Tasha's tone, the silence. That cut sharper than any knife when I asked my son to defend me. By dawn, I knew I couldn't wait for them to strike again. It was time to put my cards on the table. So I called another family dinner, but this one wasn't for celebration. This was for truth. I invited the same folks as before, cousins, nieces, church friends, the ones who had seen the tension rising. I wanted witnesses. I wanted ears and eyes to hold the story, because people like Tasha thrived in the dark. It was time to drag everything into the light. That evening, I cooked just enough to keep folks at the table. Fried chicken, biscuits, a pot of greens, but not so much that anyone mistook it for a party. When everyone arrived, I kept my face calm, but inside, my chest was tight with fire. We sat down, plates half full, voices low. Marcus looked uneasy, and Tasha wore that tight little smile she always did when she thought she was in control. I didn't waste time. "Before anyone eats," I said, rising to my feet, "there's something I need to address. Last week, this house, this family, was nearly torn apart by lies and greed. Tonight, we're going to set things straight." The room stilled. Marcus shifted in his chair. Tasha leaned back, crossing her arms like she was ready for battle. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. My hands shook slightly, but my voice was steady. "These are the updated papers for this house and my estate. The deed, the will. Everything that matters." Gasps rippled through the room. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, holding it up for all to see. "This deed is locked in my name. As long as I live, no one else's name will touch it without my say-so. Not Marcus, not Tasha. No one." Tasha's smile cracked. I laid down the next document. This will state clearly what happens when I pass, and let me be crystal clear. No greedy hands will rewrite my story. No one will twist my age into weakness. No one will erase me while I'm still breathing. The room murmured. Cousin Henry nodded firmly. Laverne smirked, like she'd been waiting for this. Then I pulled out the last piece of paper, the one that made Tasha's eyes widen. "And this," I said, "is a letter from my doctor. It proves I am of sound mind, fully capable of making my own decisions. So if anyone here was plotting to declare me unfit, if anyone thought they could sneak behind closed doors and use the law to take what isn't theirs, think again." The silence that followed was deafening. Tasha's face turned red. She tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. "Well, Mama, nobody was saying you weren't competent. I don't know where you're getting that idea." I slammed my hand on the table, hard enough to rattle the dishes. "Don't you dare lie to my face. I heard you. Every whisper, every plan, every poisonous word about me being too old to know what I'm doing. You wanted this house. You wanted me. Gone. Well, now you know, you'll get neither." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time since she walked into my life, Tasha looked small, exposed. Marcus sat frozen, his face pale. I turned to him, my heart aching. "And you, my son, you let her do this. You stood by while she tried to erase me. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I wouldn't fight back." He opened his mouth. "Mama, No." My voice cut him off. "You don't get to speak right now. You don't get to explain away your silence, because silence is betrayal, Marcus, and you betrayed me." The weight of the words hung heavy. He bowed his head, shame written all over his face. The table buzzed with whispers. My family looked at me with respect, some with pity, but none with doubt. I had spoken my truth, and I had the proof to back it up. I gathered the documents back into the envelope and tucked it away. Then I looked Tasha dead in the eye. "You can scream. You can scheme. You can try to paint this house any color you want. But the foundation is mine. The roof is mine. The papers are mine. And as long as I'm alive, you will never take what I built." The room was silent again. Even the air felt heavy. Tasha's lips tightened. She grabbed her napkin, threw it on the table, and stood. "Come on, Marcus," she snapped. "We don't have to sit here and be disrespected." But Marcus didn't move. He stayed in his chair, staring down at his plate, trapped between two worlds. "Marcus," she hissed. He finally looked up, his eyes wet. "Tasha, maybe we need to let this go." Her jaw dropped. For once, she had no words. She stormed toward the door, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. But before she left, she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Mama. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of me." I met her glare, steady as stone. "You're right," I said softly. "This isn't over. Not until you learn the difference between family and greed." And with that, she slammed the door so hard the walls shook. I sat back down, my hands trembling, my heart heavy. I had won the battle. Yes, but the war was far from over, because when a woman like Tasha feels cornered, she doesn't retreat. She reloads. After that dinner, the house felt different, not quieter. No, the air was heavy, like the kind that hangs before a thunderstorm. Every step I took echoed with tension. Tasha barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words were clipped, sharp, like knives wrapped in silk. Marcus moved around like a ghost, avoiding my eyes, muttering excuses under his breath. And me? I changed too. I stopped being the maid, the cook, the peacekeeper. For years I had carried this house on my back, scrubbing floors, making meals, paying bills without thanks. But after what they had done, I decided it was time they felt my absence. So one morning, when Marcus came into the kitchen, surprised, there was no breakfast waiting. I looked him straight in the eye. "You're grown. You can make your own eggs." He blinked at me, confused. almost offended. But I held my ground. That same evening, when laundry sat unfolded, when bills piled up unopened on the counter, I didn't move to touch them. I sat in my chair, rocking slowly, and let the silence speak. Tasha noticed first. "Mama, the sink's full." I looked at her with calm eyes. "Then wash it." The way her face twisted, like she couldn't comprehend me not bending to her will, made me want to laugh. For so long she'd been pushing me, disrespecting me, trying to erase me. And all that time I had been giving her power by doing everything, by carrying burdens she never even noticed. Now, I was done. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Dinners shrank from feasts to sandwiches, laundry piled up in corners, the garden wilted without care, and every time they looked at me, expecting me to step in, I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. At night, I could hear them arguing behind their bedroom door. "You're her son, Marcus. Control her." "I'm trying, but she's being stubborn." "No, you're weak. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone, and now she's making us live like this." I smiled in the dark because for once it wasn't me carrying the weight. It was them. But I didn't just stop with silence. I made moves, quiet moves. I went back to Mr. Carter, the lawyer, and set up a trust in my mother's name. A charitable trust that would eventually fund scholarships for children in our church, provide meals for families in need, and keep my legacy alive long after I was gone. That way, even if Marcus begged, even if Tasha clawed, they could never touch the heart of what I had built. I transferred certain accounts, tied up loose ends, and made sure everything was documented, notarized, and sealed. Every step, every signature was one more brick in the fortress I was building around myself. And I didn't hide it. No, I left just enough crumbs for Tasha to see, just enough papers left on the desk, just enough whispered phone calls to make her restless. One afternoon, she barged into my room without knocking, her eyes darting to the folder on my desk. "What's this?" she demanded. I closed it slowly, locking eyes with her. "My business." Her jaw clenched. "Your business affects us, Mama." I smiled thinly. "No, baby. My business protects me." The fury in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She hated that she wasn't in control anymore. The days stretched long, each one more tense than the last. The silence between us grew sharp, dangerous. She stopped inviting friends over, stopped playing hostess in my living room. Even Marcus grew quieter, shame eating at him, though he still lacked the courage to truly stand up. But the real storm came the night I caught them whispering in the living room. I had come, down for water, moving softly, and their voices reached me before I rounded the corner. "She's trying to cut us out," Tasha hissed. "I saw the documents. She's moving money. She's setting things up so we get nothing." Marcus groaned, his voice low. "What do you want me to do, Tasha? She's my mother." "She's not thinking about you. She's thinking about herself. If she won't give it to us while she's alive, we'll make her regret it." I froze in the hallway, the glass trembling in my hand. "Make me regret it." Those words slithered through the dark like snakes. I tiptoed back to my room, my heart pounding. But instead of fear, what I felt was clarity. This wasn't just a tug of war anymore. This was war, plain and simple. And in war, silence isn't weakness. Silence is strategy. I lay in bed that night, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, and whispered to myself, "Let them come. Let them push. Every move they make only tightens the trap. Because now, with the trust in place, the papers secured, and proof of their schemes already in my possession, I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing to strike. And when I did, the whole family, the whole community, would see them for who they truly were. I knew the church would be the stage. In our town, the church isn't just a building. It's the courtroom, the kitchen table, the gossip mill, and the place where reputations either crumble or stand up tall. If I wanted people to see the truth, to hear it from someone they trusted, that's where it had to happen. so I waited. I let the days pass like a slow drum roll, while Tasha fumed and Marcus shuffled around like a man who'd swallowed his spine. I kept my head down, attended service, greeted folks with my practiced smile, but I didn't speak of what I was planning. I had learned that people will stand by a rumor. They will rally behind a whisper. But once you set the facts in front of them, clear as daylight, most of them will do the right thing. That Sunday, the pews filled up like they always do. Ladies in hats, men in press suits, children fidgeting with their programs. The pastor gave a sermon about honesty and stewardship, as if he'd known this was coming. After service, the usual hugs and gossip swirled, but I felt calm, a cold kind of calm. I had called in a favor from Cousin Rosa, bless her lawyer heart, and asked her to wait until the end of the luncheon to speak. She'd seen the papers. She'd heard the recordings. She was fair, respected, and not afraid of a little conflict if it meant righting a wrong. We ate, plates clinking, the conversation meandering from weather to the youth choir. Tasha sat at the head of the table like she owned the room, laughing too loud, checking her phone between bites. Marcus sat beside her, eyes flicking to me and away, like a man trying to hide a bruise. When dessert trays came out, Cousin Rosa stood up. She cleared her throat, just a small, purposeful sound, and the room leaned in. "If you don't mind," she said, "I have something I must speak about. It concerns our own family here." Heads turned. Tasha's smile faltered into a line. The pastor's eyebrows knit. I watched them, my heart steady. Rosa didn't waste time. She told the story plain, how she'd been asked to review certain documents, what the lawyer had said, the way things looked on paper when you pulled at the threads. She talked about whispered conversations and the red flags that come up when people try to make someone appear less than they are. She spoke of the importance of community protecting its elders. Her words were measured, legal, but full of fire. Then she looked directly at Tasha. "If anyone here has been whispering about declaring Mrs. Johnson unfit, or if anyone has been trying to pressure Marcus into changing the deed without her informed consent, I urge you to stop. There is no honor in stealing a life's work." You could have heard a pin drop. Tasha's face went from flushed to chalky. Her hands trembled around her fork. The women near her muttered, and a few shook their heads in disapproval. I felt the room tilt in my favor, like a tide finally turning. But Rosa wasn't done. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Also," she said, "there are recordings and notes submitted to the attorney. We have proof of conversations suggesting intent to manipulate and to question Mrs. Johnson's competence without basis. If anyone here wants to see them, speak to me privately. I will not let our elders be pushed aside." Murmuring rose, then quieted as people absorbed the weight of it. I saw faces I'd known since childhood soften with anger on my behalf. I saw Pastor Jim's jaw harden. I saw Laverne next to me squeeze my hand like a lifeline. Tasha's chair scraped back. She stood up, her voice sharp. "This is slander," she cried. "You're all listening to lies. My husband and I are only trying to secure our future. I won't be accused in front of God's people." But the room did not rally to her. Instead, a church deacon I'd taught to sing when he was a boy stood up and said, "We don't run on accusations, Miss Tasha, but we do protect members. And when someone trusted brings evidence, we listen." His words were a polite door closing, not a reprimand, but a line that could not be crossed. Marcus sat down. His face looked like a waveform of confusion and shame. He stumbled with a half excuse. "Mama, this is between us." Rosa cut him off gently but firmly. "No, Marcus. When family matters spill into our community, the community has a responsibility. Your mother asked for witnesses. We are those witnesses. We will not allow schemes against our elders." That was when the ripple began. People I thought neutral edged closer, nodding. Old friends I'd served coffee to for decades came up to me with hugs and whispered words of support. A cousin I hadn't spoken with in years grabbed Tasha's elbow and said, "Girl, this ain't right." The gossip mill turned, but this time it manufactured outrage on my side. Tasha's face twisted. She stepped toward me, voice near a hiss. "You think you can humiliate me here?" she mouthed. "This isn't over." I looked at her, really looked, and for a second I felt pity. Not for her, but for the idea that someone could let greed sour them so completely. Her mouth moved. Her words were small and dangerous, but the congregation's eyes were on her now, stern and unblinking. Marcus's shoulders sagged. He rose slowly, coming to stand beside me. His head hung low, eyes wet. For a heartbeat, I thought perhaps he would finally choose me. He opened his mouth, looked at the floor, then at Tasha. Shame and confusion warred across his face. He turned to the crowd and said in a voice that cracked, I didn't know." The honesty in that simple admission landed like thunder. It was the truth, not an excuse, but an opening. People don't stay mad at someone who admits they were wrong. They hurt for them instead. I felt my heart twist, proud and terribly sad all at once. Tasha's hand flew to her mouth. She looked betrayed, exposed, and dangerous. She stooped to grab her purse, muttering threats under her breath as she left the church before Marcus could follow. The doors closed behind her with a finality that sounded like a verdict. Marcus turned to me then, shame in his eyes. But by then, it was too late. The night after the church, I sat alone in my room, the quilt my mama made draped across my lap. My hands moved over the stitches, rough in some places, smooth in others, each piece of cloth holding its own story. I thought about the path that had brought me here, from a young wife with nothing but hope, to a widow carrying the world on her shoulders, to a mother who gave up everything for her son. And now, here I was, an old woman still fighting, still standing. Marcus knocked on my door around midnight. When I opened it, he looked broken. His shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He stepped in without a word and sank into the chair across from me. "Mama," he whispered, his voice small, "I don't know what to do." I studied him, my heart aching. This was still my son, my baby boy who once clung to my hand at the bus stop. But now he was a man, torn in half by love and loyalty, blinded by a woman's greed. "You know what to do, Marcus," I said softly. "You've always known. You just didn't want to see it." He bowed his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I let her come between us. I let her make me believe you were the enemy. I let her talk me into things I knew weren't right. I was weak." I sighed, the sound heavy with years of disappointment and love tangled together. Weakness isn't permanent, son, but the choices you make out of it can be. That's what you need to understand. We sat in silence for a while. Then I pulled the envelope from my drawer, the one with the papers, the will, the trust. I set it on the table between us. "Do you see this?" I asked. He nodded. "This is more than paper. This is my life, Marcus. Every late night I stayed up working, every meal I skipped so you could eat, every tear I cried when I didn't know how I'd keep the lights on. This is the roof that kept us safe when storms raged outside. And you were ready to hand it over to someone who never lifted a finger to build it." He flinched, shame written across his face. "I can forgive a lot," I said, my voice trembling. "But I will never forgive being erased. Never." And that's what she tried to do. She didn't just want this house. She wanted me gone, like I never mattered. And you let her. His sobs filled the room. He reached for my hand, but I held it firm on my lap. "Mama, please, tell me how to make this right." I looked at him, long and hard. "It starts with you choosing who you are, not who she wants you to be, not who the world expects, but the man I raised you to be. And if you can't do that, then you'll lose more than this house. You'll lose me." He wept, and for once I let him. Because this wasn't about soothing anymore. It was about truth. In the days that followed, things shifted. Tasha kept her distance, icy and silent, But the sting of her humiliation at church spread through the community like wildfire. Folks whispered, yes, but their whispers carried judgment for her, not me. For once I wasn't the one being questioned. She was. I heard she packed her bags for a few days, left Marcus to stew in his shame. Some said she'd be back. Women like her always circle back when there's still something left to grab. But others said the damage was too deep, that no woman could recover from being exposed the way she had. I didn't wait to find out. I finished what I started. I finalized the trust. I moved certain accounts beyond anyone's reach. I made sure that when my time came, my legacy wouldn't be siphoned into greedy hands, and I began to live differently. I opened my doors again, not to strangers, not to parties I never wanted, but to family who still knew the meaning of respect. My nieces came by to help me cook. Neighbors dropped in to share coffee, and laughter filled the rooms again. The house felt alive, not with tension, but with the warmth it was built on. Marcus came around too, quieter, humbled. He cut the grass without me asking, fixed the porch steps, sat on the swing with me in the evenings. He didn't bring Tasha, and I didn't ask. I figured time would tell whether she had any place left in his life. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he finally said, "Mama, I'm sorry. Truly. I see now. I let her blind me. I lost myself. But I don't want to lose you." I placed my hand over his. My voice was soft but steady. "Son, respect isn't a right. It's a choice. Every day. You'll have to earn mine back." He nodded, and for the first time in months I believed he might mean it. As for Tasha? Her silence was its own answer. Maybe she was plotting still, maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore. The fortress was built, the lesson delivered. Because this story wasn't just about a house, it was about the truth carved into every brick, every board, every stitch of that quilt across my lap. Family is built on love, not ownership, on sacrifice, not entitlement, on respect, not control. Forget that, and you lose everything. The house, the history, the very people who would have stood by you. I closed my eyes that night, listening to the creak of the old house settling around me, and felt peace. Not because the storm was gone, but because I had weathered it and come out standing. And that, to me, was victory.